This is a very familiar sight every time the Prime Minister lands in a place where there are a lot of Indians, and there are very few places left on earth where there isn't a large Indian diaspora. But the kind of fervor, the kind of love, the kind of adulation that the Prime Minister receives when he lands in places like this, needs to be seen to be believed. Because the cynics will say these are people who've been hired and brought here. But anyone who's been among crowds such as these abroad, from New York to London, to African countries, to Japan, to now in Australia, and this is not the first time, remember, in Australia that such a thing is happening.
Hello, lovely. So feeling so happy and really. उन्होंने कहा कि आप बहुत अच्छा बनाते हैं, because last time when he came in 2014, उन्होंने मुझे मेरी पेंटिंग को एक और ऑटोग्राफ दिया था, and 2014 में when he came last time, and I have collection of so many paintings, so मुझे था कि मुझे उनकी लेनी है और ये मेरा achievement है, and really feel happy कि such a noble person, very known globally, and मेरे घर में इनका ये आशीर्वाद है. उन्होंने 2014 में इनका ऑटोग्राफ किया था. ये आशीर्वाद है, इसके लिए वंदे मातरम.
The images are very, very familiar. This is not the Prime Minister's first time amidst the diaspora in Australia. He's met many of these people before. Many of them are back. You've heard Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, talk about how he's been inundated with requests for passes for that big event in Sydney that's scheduled for tomorrow. We're getting a lot of reactions in. I don't want our viewers to, miss any of that flavor and that sound. Let's just cut across and listen into many of those reactions coming in.
Yeah, we are here to welcome Sri Narendra Modi, and it's a great time for India. India is going to become the third largest economy in the world in next decade. And we wish him all the best for the success in his upcoming election and all the best for the third term. Thank you, Mr. Modi.
Hello, good evening to India. This is Sunil Vyas from United Indian Associations. We are so proud to have Modi ji visit here again in Sydney once more. Modi ji is a man of exceptional talent. We are so fortunate for the 21st century. Modi ji is our leader. He's a world leader. May he have a long life and continue to do all the great work he has been doing. Bharat Mata ki jai, Jai Hind.
Modi for 2024. Go Modi. Hi.
Electric atmosphere outside the hotel in Sydney, where the Prime Minister is still there doing his namastes and meeting with families, little children, the elderly, people from the Indian embassy in Canberra, people, Indian businessmen, families who live there, expats, people from the software industry. There are so many Indians in Australia, and a small section of them have all decided to be there tonight to greet the Prime Minister as he makes his way into Sydney. He's going to be meeting them tomorrow in a much more structured manner inside a venue which holds 20,000 people, and we understand it's already been completely booked out. It's a full house. I want to bring in Professor Salvatore Babonis. He's a sociologist, very well known here in India. He's live with us from Sydney. Professor Babonis, thanks very much for your time and being with us. To bring us these live reports from Sydney. Incredible pictures, that have become so familiar. This is signature Modi. Every time he lands, there's all this adulation, Indians sort of falling over each other to try and, meet with the Prime Minister. You've seen this thing over and over again, city after city. What do you make of it over there in Sydney, Professor?
Well, of course, I wish I could be part of it. It looks like such a great party. But look, I'm not inside the hotel. That's for the diaspora. That's for the people who, who really need to be there, the people who it means a lot to emotionally. I have a lot of fun. I've been thrilled to be so embraced by India. But, really, this is an event for the diaspora, and it's organized by them. This wasn't Anthony Albanese inviting Narendra Modi to attend a stadium event. This was the Indian diaspora inviting Narendra Modi to a stadium event and inviting Anthony Albanese to join him there as well. And I think that's something everyone in India should be aware. This massive reception has not been put on by the Australian government. It's been put on by Indians themselves. Yeah,
very true. And, this connect that the Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister, has with that diaspora, it's an enviable thing, isn't it, Professor? Not every world leader actually has that. All world leaders visit different countries, but the kind of connect that Narendra Modi has with diaspora Indians is a rare thing. You don't see people coming out, inconveniencing themselves late at night outside a hotel. I don't know what the weather is like, just to get, maybe a few minutes with the Prime Minister, if at all.
Well, this is Sydney, so the weather is beautiful. That's not a problem.
Lucky you. It's about 45 degrees here.
But no, it really is something that is unique to India and the Indian diaspora. There's a massive Chinese diaspora here in Sydney, Australia. The Indian and Chinese diasporas are roughly at exactly the same number, depending how you count, 500,000 to 750,000 strong. But the Indian diaspora is growing more rapidly. The Indian diaspora is also more likely to put down roots and stay. So the Indian diaspora is now overtaking the Chinese diaspora. Now, when Chinese diplomats come to visit Sydney, it's a big yawn from the Chinese diaspora. They have absolutely no interest because these are not their politicians. These are leaders who are leaders over them, not leaders who report to them. Of course, when an Indian politician comes to visit, especially if it's Mr. Modi, but even if it's anybody else, I mean, when members of Lok Sabha come to visit, they get a crowd here in Sydney in a way that no Chinese parliamentarian ever would.
It's incredible. And, while the Prime Minister was in Japan, Professor, you did see a lot of Indian opposition leaders, taking pot shots at the Prime Minister, sniping at him, during those photo ops while he was being hugged and, someone was touching his feet. There were a lot of cynical things being said by opposition politicians here in India. What do you make of that? Is it frustration? Is it jealousy? Is it irritation that the Prime Minister still enjoys that level of sort of personal popularity?
No, I don't think so. Politicians are politicians, and the role of an opposition is to oppose. Now, let's be clear, if the opposition were to denigrate Indian state symbols or the President of India on a state visit, that would be something very different. But we have to remember always that however popular Narendra Modi may be, no matter how emotional many Indians may feel about him, he is a politician and a leader of government. He is not a head of state who is a symbol of the nation as such. I know many people treat him as a symbol of the nation, and they have every right to do so, but there's nothing wrong with an opposition opposing.
No, absolutely. In your view, and you've watched the Prime Minister's visits. You've seen, you've been to India a couple of times, Professor. Right. In your view, in your assessment, what do you think Prime Minister Modi has done for India's image abroad? This is a time of great flux, of transition. The world is changing. The order of things is changing in the world as well. In your view, what do you think Prime Minister Modi's role has been in changing the world's view of India?
It's not Mr. Modi who has changed the world's view of India. It's the Indians who have changed the world's view of India. It's very much the diaspora. Now, Mr. Modi is popular among the diaspora. That's fine. But even he recognizes, I'm certain, that it's not him personally whom other countries want to talk to. It's him as the representative of India. And when they see the Indian diaspora coming all out to see him, to meet him, to welcome him, I mean, a stadium event like we're seeing in Sydney tomorrow is simply, well, I was about to say it's unprecedented. That's not true. it is precedented one time by Mr. Modi's last visit to Australia, and that is the only precedent for this event. Now, other world leaders don't get that kind of reception, even from their own citizens abroad. So what gives Mr. Modi such gravitas abroad is the reception given to him by Indians abroad. It really is all about the people, not the politicians.
As someone who lives and works in Australia, from your experience, Professor, how has that image changed? You're right, it's not just about Prime Minister Modi, it's about the diaspora, it's about what's happening here in India as well. How has that image changed from your perspective?
Indians used to be seen as potential service workers. Now, there was never an environment in Australia like in the Persian Gulf where Indians primarily worked in construction and were highly exploited. There was never any kind of that exploitation in Australia. But there were a lot of Indian restaurant workers, a lot of Indian delivery bicycle riders, these sorts of occupations. And other Asian and Southeast Asian, South Asian nationalities are still seen in that light. Of course, the difference is that Indians in Australia are now seen primarily as professionals. That is, there may be some Indians who, nothing wrong with working for a living, who operate a convenience store. But, if the mental image people have of an Indian in Australia is very much of a doctor, an engineer, an IIT person, a business person, an investor. Remember, India is a major international investor in Australia, and that's not all about Adani and coal. I mean, there are also other coal. There's Wollongong coal, which is related to the Jindal group of companies, but there are also the technology companies. All four of India's big technology outsourcing companies have a major presence in Australia. So certainly when people think Indian in Australia today, they think professional.
Professor, last question. Are you going to by any chance be at that big stadium event tomorrow in Sydney?
I hope to be. Look, I have been invited. I have a ticket, but I do teach for a living. A lot of people think I somehow run around, boosting India for a living, but I do teach. I have a class to teach tomorrow afternoon, and I'm hoping that they will let me into the stadium a little bit late to get past security. We'll see.
Okay, I hope they heard you say that right now on the show, and they'll make a note of it, and we'll see you there tomorrow then. Professor Salvatore Babonis, thank you very much for your time. Good to see you there in Australia. You've got better weather than us. I think the whole world has better weather than us here in India's national capital, sadly. But thanks very much for your time, Professor. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Okay, these pictures from outside the hotel where the Prime Minister arrived just a few moments ago. He's signing portraits for people. He's taking selfies with Indian diaspora. There are people singing songs for him. He's meeting with children, with families. Vishal Bonga is live with me from outside that hotel. Vishal, coming to you very quickly for an update. Is the Prime Minister still outside, or has he gone back into the hotel?
No, indeed, he's gone into the hotel and people have left. There's no people, there's no Indian diaspora standing outside. What I can tell you is that everyone has left for the day and the Prime Minister is on inside. The Foreign Secretary is holding a press briefing just a few minutes from now in the same hotel, and the important announcement would be made. But what's more important is the preparation for tomorrow. Tomorrow morning would be a big day in Sydney for Indian diaspora. A lot of people have gathered here from various cities of Australia, from Tasmania, from Adelaide, from Perth. People have flown over. There was a chartered flight that came from Melbourne, full of people to Sydney to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in a big stadium like Sydney Olympic Stadium, where it has a huge capacity. More than 20,000 people are expected. And what we were talking to the venue organizers, they say that right now, till now, people have been asking for tickets, which means that there's a huge fan following of Prime Minister Modi here in Australia. Australian Indian diaspora is a very big Indian diaspora, and being the priority for Australian government is taking this tour very seriously because they see that India could replace China for the trade between Australia and India. There was a lot of exports happening with China, where the Chinese are really bullied the Australian government, and then the Australian government had taken a very strategical decision to partner with Australia. Earlier, it was under Scott Morrison's
Yes.
The Liberal government, now the Labour government is also really following the footsteps of the Liberal government, and they see India as a very important strategic partner.
Vishal, this big bilateral that's scheduled for tomorrow, before the big diaspora meet, are there any big announcements expected to be had from that bilateral? We do know that the body language, the relationship between the two prime ministers is also very close.
Yes, indeed. What I'll tell you that earlier it was Quad, but the Quad could not happen because of Joe Biden really not to Australia. But indeed, this is very important, a milestone for the relationship between Australia and India. The Indian Prime Minister and the Australian Prime Minister could discuss on various factors like trade, finance, and also visa simplification for the Indian citizens. There is a huge talk that there could be visa granted for Indian citizens at par with the European community. There's a lot of talk that is going among the Indian community. Although the safety of Hindu temple is also one of the important issues where a lot of the Hindu community leaders have written to the Prime Minister to wake up this issue with the Australian Prime Minister. But indeed, if you talk about the relationship between India and Australia, they are going to get more important after this bilateral meeting, because Australia has also decided that India is a natural ally to Australia.
Absolutely.
Earlier, Australia was relying on China, but now they've learned from their mistake. They want to shift towards India so that they can really have a very good trade relationship, people-to-people relationship with India. Australia and India are the natural partners. I was talking to one of the senior politicians. They say that the next century could be a relationship between Australia and India.
Vishal, appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much. Look forward to your reporting later today and tomorrow as well during those important meetings as well as the big diaspora meet. I want to get in a word from India Today's Gaurav Sawant as well, who's been looking at all these events very, very closely. Gaurav, your perspective on the Prime Minister's time in Australia tomorrow. Very, very important relationship that has especially emerged in the last few years. Massive diaspora in Australia. The Quad relationship is already there, but even this bilateral relationship, extremely key, to where India is emerging now.
Shiv, you're absolutely right. So just look at the number of times the Indian Prime Minister and his Australian counterpart have met this year or are scheduled to meet this year. In March, the Australian Prime Minister was in India. They watched that cricket match together at the Narendra Modi Stadium, that India-Australia cricket match at Motera. So that was March, 90,000 people were watching that. The Australian Prime Minister referred to it at that Quad meeting in Hiroshima, saying that there are 20,000 people who are there for the event. Now, the images that you see right now, if this is the trailer, the actual movie would be at a place which will now be called Little India at Harris Park in Sydney. 500,000 Indian diaspora, an Indian diaspora that's growing. So this would be the third meeting. Yet they've already met at Hiroshima, and they will meet once again for G20 in September in India. So when two prime ministers meet of two powerful democracies 4 to 5 times a year, it just shows how strong that relationship is. And it's not restricted just to Quad or to checkmate China. Look at the trade agreement that's happened in December 22 and the comprehensive agreement that's expected by end 2023. A large amount of Australian goods will have access to Indian markets, and we're a huge market. Then education and tourism is one area where Australia is very keen that India plays, and Indian tourists and students play a much bigger role. So this is a comprehensive relationship between two countries. Again, you'd recall what the American President Joe Biden said about the Prime Minister's role in the Indo-Pacific region, that you are a very influential man in the Indo-Pacific. You've seen the respect the Prime Minister got at Papua New Guinea and the awards he got from various countries of the Indo-Pacific. So that just shows that India has a much bigger role to play in this region. In fact, these 4 democracies, India, Australia, Japan and the United States of America, in a huge way to checkmate an expansionist China, Shiv.
Very, very interesting. And that China angle is all important. I want to get a word in from India Today's Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan, as well. She's live with us from Srinagar. She's covering the, the G20 meet that's happening there. Geeta, the Prime Minister's arrival in Sydney, nothing surprising. Those amazing images are very much to be expected every time the Prime Minister lands anywhere these days. Tomorrow, that big bilateral. And, from what we've been hearing, the whole China angle, how India is set to tip the scales against China as far as Australia is concerned, very, very important and something to look out for.
Well, like you said, China, it seems, is a part of our news wheel, not just when it comes to Australia, but also when it comes to Srinagar and the G20, which they're giving a miss. But we see the show of strength with the kind of participation. And that you saw in Papua New Guinea, where Prime Minister was, and in Australia, Shiv, where Prime Minister is. You are going to see this, and you're going to see this with a huge thrust. It is time that the world comes together to fight aggression of any kind from any country. And while India and all the major powers say that their move is not directed against any one country, but against aggressors, for now, that case is China. And so, yes, Australia, to secure these waters, the focus is the Indo-Pacific, and is the reason why India has now started focusing on the Pacific Island nations.
Okay. Geeta, sorry to interrupt you. We're just cutting across to listen into the External Affairs Ministry briefing that's happening in Sydney right now. Let's just listen.
As Paramita Tripathi, Joint Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs, looking after the Oceania Division. Sir, without further ado, may I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to friends from the media. As you can see, we have just entered the hotel, straight touching down from Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Prime Minister arrived just a while ago on the third leg of his three-nation tour. It has been absolutely packed visit so far, with both bilateral and multilateral engagements, about which we have spoken over the last couple of days. Just to share with you very briefly the sense of proceedings, the meetings, the discussions that happened between the Prime Minister of India and the 14 leaders of Pacific Island countries at the third India FIPIC summit, which was held in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Prime Minister arrived in Port Moresby late on Sunday night. This was the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. And in a very special gesture, Prime Minister James Marape of Papua New Guinea received the Honourable Prime Minister at the airport. Prime Minister also received a 19-gun salute and a ceremonial guard of honour at the airport, besides a special traditional welcome reserved normally for the returning family members of that country was also accorded to the Honourable Prime Minister. And today, Prime Minister co-hosted with Prime Minister James Marape the third summit of the Forum for India-Pacific Island Cooperation, FIPIC. This is a unique platform that brings together India and 14 Pacific Island countries.
We'll get back to that press conference in just a minute when the Indian official starts talking about what's going to happen tomorrow between the Indian and Australian Prime Ministers. In the meantime, let me take you through all the top developments from the Prime Minister's Papua New Guinea visit. Remember, he's landed in Sydney straight from Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Well, top honour for India as Papua New Guinea has conferred their highest award on Prime Minister Modi. The island nation awarded the Companion of the Order of Logohu to Prime Minister Modi for championing the cause of unity of Pacific Island countries. Very few non-residents of Papua New Guinea have received this decoration. Well, not just Papua New Guinea, the Prime Minister has also been conferred with the highest honour of the Pacific Island country of Fiji. Prime Minister Modi was awarded with the Companion of the Order of Fiji for his global leadership. Only a handful of non-Fijians have received this honour till date. Prime Minister Modi co-hosted the third FIPIC summit with his Papua New Guinea counterpart James Marape, where he laid out a plan to boost partnerships with Pacific Island countries. The Prime Minister said India considers its responsibility to convey the Global South's concerns. Even when the Prime Minister landed in Papua New Guinea yesterday, as a gesture of respect that's gone completely viral, Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape touched Modi's feet. A very Indian gesture while welcoming him to the island nation. The country generally doesn't give a ceremonial welcome to any leader after sunset, but an exception was made for Prime Minister Modi. This image of the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister touching the feet of Prime Minister Modi has gone viral all around the world. Modi was also warmly greeted by the Indian diaspora there with loud cheers during the special meet. Well, lots of the usual chants of Modi, Modi and Bharat Mata Ki Jai chants echoed as Prime Minister Modi engaged with the large Indian population in Papua New Guinea. And as part of this whirlwind visit of three nations, sources are telling India today that there has been a special gesture from New Zealand's Prime Minister. Chris Hipkins had scheduled his visit to Papua New Guinea to meet President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. But when President Biden cancelled his visit, there were doubts whether the New Zealand PM would come especially to Papua New Guinea to meet only with Prime Minister Modi, but he said he wants to keep the visit and meet with Prime Minister Modi and would fly especially to Papua New Guinea just to meet the Indian Prime Minister. So a big moment for India-New Zealand partnership and relations as well. Remember, there is a sizable Indian diaspora population in New Zealand as well. The New Zealand Prime Minister flew to Papua New Guinea, keeping his appointment. It was to meet both the US President and the Indian Prime Minister. But despite Biden cancelling that visit, the New Zealand Prime Minister kept his schedule in order to meet the Indian Prime Minister. Well, there were many moments from the Prime Minister's visit so far. Japan, Papua New Guinea and now in Australia that have put him in the spotlight. At the G7 summit in Japan's Hiroshima especially, world leaders from US President Joe Biden to the Australian Prime Minister all wanted time with Prime Minister Modi. Take a look at the big highlights, the big viral moments and the big talking points from the first few days. Waiting animatedly to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Joe Biden hugs the Indian Prime Minister in Japan. The US leader said he should ask for the Prime Minister's autograph. President Biden apparently enamored of the Indian Prime Minister's popularity in the United States. The White House already swamped by requests from American Indians wanting to attend Prime Minister Modi's programs during his state visit to Washington, D.C. next month. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese faces similar challenges. He jokingly complained that the community reception in honor of Prime Minister Modi in Sydney, scheduled for Tuesday, has been fully sold out. The venue, with a capacity of 20,000, is going to be a full house. But a large number of requests are still pouring in from Australian Indians for entry tickets. Prime Minister Modi shared a warm hug with his British counterpart Rishi Sunak. He's meeting with the Ukrainian president and mingling with diaspora Indians. Videos of Prime Minister Modi from Japan's Hiroshima hosting the G7 summit took social media by storm. And this clip from Papua New Guinea touched millions of hearts. Prime Minister Modi greeted with a traditional Indian gesture upon arrival by the Prime Minister of the island country in the Southwest Pacific Ocean. And on Monday, Prime Minister Modi conferred with the highest honor of Fiji by its Premier in recognition of his global leadership. India's moment shines once again on the global stage. Bureau Report, India Today. Srinagar is where it's at, viewer. That's where the big G20 meet has kicked off today. Kashmiri folk dance, drum rolls in the valley, delegates in saffron turbans and mega Indian star power on display. Jammu and Kashmir is hosting a 3-day G20 working group meeting on tourism that has started today. The might of the Himalayas, beautiful gardens, Srinagar has been spruced up for the event as the Kashmir Valley hosts its first global event since the abrogation of Article 370. Here's everything that's happening.
Magnificent Kashmiri folk dance. Drums, music and frolic in the valley. Superstar power in full display. Ram Charan landing in the valley. Delegates in colourful saffron turbans. Radiating India's soft power on global stage. G20 comes to the heaven on earth. This is the first grand international event in Naya Kashmir. Parts of Kashmir, once a terror hotbed, turning into diplomacy hub.
G20 के जितने भी डेलीगेट्स हैं उनके स्वागत के लिए सुरक्षा के भारी भरकम इंतजाम आप यहां पर देख सकते हैं। सारी जो डेलीगेट कंट्रीज हैं उन सब के सदस्य इस समय यहां पर पहुंचना शुरू हो गए हैं और एक एक करके अलग अलग तरह की बैठकें जो कि पर्यटन के लिहाज से बहुत अहम रहेंगी, न केवल G20 के सदस्य देशों के लिए बल्कि कश्मीर के लिए अपनी एक अलग तस्वीर पूरी दुनिया के सामने पेश करने के लिहाज से।
Srinagar city has been spruced up for the 3-day mega G20 working group meet, putting the best face forward of its improving fortunes, breaking free from decades of terror and tumult.
कश्मीर को विश्व का स्वर्ग कहा जाता है और है भी। कुछ लोगों ने मिलिटेंसी के कारण से या इस प्रकार के हालात यहां पर बनाए कि कश्मीर से धीरे धीरे जो टूरिज्म था वो सारा डाइवर्ट हो गया। धारा 370 तोड़ने के बाद परिस्थितियां बदली हैं और एक डेवलपमेंट का दौर चला है। लोगों का माइंडसेट काफी चेंज हुआ।
Beautiful facelift has been given to parts of Srinagar city and roads leading to Sher-e-Kashmir International Convention Center, the venue for the G20 meeting.
अगर किसी आयोजन के समय हम ये सामान्य यहाँ की व्यवस्था देख रहे हैं, यहाँ पर लाल चौक पे भले ही आप कंस्ट्रक्शन इस समय देख रहे हो जो कि ब्यूटिफिकेशन के ड्राइव का हिस्सा बताया जा रहा है, लेकिन ये भी एक सामान्य होती जिंदगी की तरफ बढ़ता हुआ कदम है। यहाँ सुरक्षा कर्मियों की नाम मात्र तैनाती इस बात का संकेत है कि जम्मू कश्मीर बदल चुका है, चाहे पाकिस्तान, चीन अपनी तरफ से जिस एजेंडा को आगे बढ़ाना चाहे।
Locals in the valley are elated with the big tourism boost the event will bring along.
I believe कि हम आर्टिस्ट के लिए एक गेटवे खुलेगा और अपॉर्चुनिटीज खुलेंगी, मिलेंगी।
As Kashmir turns a new leaf, usual suspects Pakistan and China are sulking. Beijing skipped the Srinagar meet, calling Kashmir a disputed land. Saudi Arabia did not register for the Kashmir event.
However, we are given to understand that Turkey and Saudi Arabia, their industry representatives will turn up over here in Srinagar for the meeting. So, industry representatives but no official representation from these 4 nations. This is to do with the problem of Kashmir, the dispute of Kashmir.
Srinagar is under massive security blanket to ensure that the high-profile event passes off peacefully. With Geeta Mohan, Shweta Singh and Ashraf Vani in Srinagar, Bureau Report, India Today.